Imagine for a moment that you woke up this morning and the entire world had been reset. No money, no possessions, no job titles. Just you, your mind, and your ability to think. Now ask yourself, would your thoughts push you toward progress, or would they trap you in the same cycle that keeps so many people stuck? Because the truth is, it's not the lack of resources that keeps most people poor. It's the lack of resourceful thinking. And that is where everything begins. Most people think in terms of limits. They look at what exists, copy it, and maybe adjust around the edges. But if all you do is compare yourself to what's already been done, you'll always stay in the shadow of someone else's idea. That's a poor thinking habit. Great breakthroughs, whether rockets, electric cars, or building a company from nothing, come when you stop asking, what do people usually do? And instead ask, what is actually possible if I strip this problem to its fundamentals? Another poor thinking habit is believing that failure is fatal. Failure is data. If you build a rocket and it explodes, you didn't lose, you learned. Yet so many people see failure as an endpoint, so they avoid risk entirely. That avoidance is what traps them. Meanwhile, those who embrace failure as feedback keep iterating until success becomes inevitable. Then there's the habit of short-term thinking. Many people chase instant gratification, a quick profit, or the easiest route. But building anything worthwhile, whether it's Tesla, SpaceX, or a better life, requires long-term focus. You have to think in decades, not days. People who remain poor often can't delay reward, and so they never build momentum. Excuses are another trap. People blame the economy, their background, their boss, their government. Excuses preserve comfort, but they also preserve poverty. If you spend your energy rationalizing why you can't, you'll never discover how you can. A habit that kills potential is avoiding knowledge. Some stop learning after school, as if education ends with a diploma. But the world is changing every day. If you're not upgrading your mind, you're already falling behind. Curiosity and self-education are non-negotiable if you want to break free. Another dangerous habit is overvaluing opinions. Too many people are guided by what their neighbors think, what society thinks, or what experts think is realistic. But reality is shaped by people who ignore the crowd and follow evidence, logic, and vision. That's why first principles thinking is so powerful. It frees you from the prison of consensus. And finally, there's the habit of underestimating effort. People want extraordinary results with ordinary effort. That's impossible. You can't expect to outcompete by working the same hours, thinking the same way, and taking the same risks as everyone else. To escape mediocrity, you have to push beyond average, because average effort guarantees average outcomes. So if most people stay poor, it's not because opportunity doesn't exist. It's because poor thinking habits keep them locked where they are. The world is full of resources, but only those who change the way they think can truly access them. Picture this, you're standing on the edge of a vast desert. Endless sand stretching out in every direction. There are no roads, no maps, no guides. All you have is your mind. Now, some people would look at that desert and immediately feel hopeless. Too far, too empty, too uncertain. But another person would look at the same desert and think, what if this isn't emptiness at all? What if it's just space waiting to be transformed into something new? That difference in perspective, that difference in how we use our mind, is exactly what separates those who break free from limitations from those who remain trapped by them. The human brain is the most powerful tool ever created, yet most people never learn how to use it properly. They inherit patterns of thinking, hand, me, down beliefs, fears, and assumptions, and then they mistake those patterns for reality. They say, this is just the way things are. But nothing is just the way it is. Every technology, every breakthrough, every fortune was built because someone decided not to accept reality at face value. The limitation wasn't the lack of money, or resources, or luck. It was the refusal to challenge poor thinking habits. Think about it. When people face a problem, the default reaction is often to ask, who else has solved this? And how did they do it? That seems practical, but it's also dangerous. Because when you copy what others have done, you're locking yourself into their boundaries. You're anchoring your creativity to what's already been proven, instead of asking the more powerful question: what is possible if I forget what's been done and look at the raw truth of the situation? Most people don't ask that question because it's uncomfortable. It demands energy, courage, and imagination. But that's exactly why most people stay where they are. Look at how people talk about money, for example. Poor thinking habits lead to phrases like, it's impossible to get ahead, or the rich just get richer, or you need money to make money. These are not laws of physics, they're habits of thought. They're excuses disguised as wisdom. And the moment you adopt them as truth, you've already lost. Because now your brain isn't working to solve problems. It's working to justify why you can't. And a mind that justifies can never innovate. Instead, the real power comes from asking fundamental questions. Why does something cost what it costs? What's it made of? What are the base ingredients, the raw materials, the essential truths? When you train your mind to break problems into their smallest parts, you suddenly unlock possibilities nobody else sees. Most people never do this. They look at a car and think, that's too expensive. Someone else looks at the same car and thinks, why is it expensive? What drives the cost? Could those parts be made cheaper? Could a new process change everything? That's the difference between staying stuck and breaking free. But here's where poor thinking habits are truly dangerous. They're invisible. People don't walk around saying, I choose to think poorly today. No, it sneaks in quietly, disguised as being realistic or playing it safe. People tell themselves they're making smart choices when in reality they're avoiding the discomfort of thinking deeply. They pick certainty over curiosity, repetition over reinvention, and slowly, year after year, they build walls in their own mind until the prison is so solid they don't even notice it anymore. The tragedy is not that people lack potential. The tragedy is that their potential is buried under patterns of thought they never question. Imagine carrying a rocket engine in your hands, but refusing to ignite it, because someone once told you rockets don't fly. That's how most people treat their own mind. They underestimate it, doubt it, and eventually stop testing its limits. And that is how poor thinking habits quietly, systematically, keep most people poor. Now, here's the powerful part. Thought habits can be rewritten. The same way a computer can be reprogrammed, your brain can be trained to operate differently. But it requires two things: awareness and deliberate practice. Awareness means catching yourself when you slip into lazy thought. I can't. It's impossible. That's just the way it is. Every time you notice it, you shine a light on the invisible chains that hold you down. And deliberate practice means asking better questions every single day. Not, can I afford this? But, how could I create the resources for this? Not, what's the safe path? But, what's the path that actually matters? It doesn't happen overnight. Habits don't dissolve instantly. But the more you push your brain to operate differently, the more it adapts. And eventually, the desert that once looked empty starts to look like opportunity. The walls that once felt permanent start to crumble. You begin to realize that wealth, whether financial, intellectual, or emotional, has never been about the size of your bank account. It has always been about the size of your thinking. Most people underestimate how powerful even a small shift in thought can be. Changing the question you ask yourself in a single moment can alter the trajectory of your entire life. One person looks at a broken system and thinks, "That's just how it works." Another looks at the same system and thinks, "How could it work differently?" That single thought is the seed of innovation, progress, and fortune. And that seed is available to everyone, but only if you're willing to challenge poor thinking habits. So when you find yourself staring at your own desert, empty space, obstacles, uncertainty, remember what matters isn't the desert. What matters is the lens through which you see it. Most people will see a barren wasteland and turn back. But if you can train your mind to see potential where others see nothing, if you can reprogram your thinking away from excuses and toward possibilities, then the very desert that scares everyone else will become the ground on which you build something extraordinary. That is the real difference. It's not luck. It's not background. It's not resources. It's the mind. And the choice is always there. Let poor thinking habits lock you in place, or train your thoughts to unlock everything you've been searching for. When people face a challenge, most don't actually try to solve it. They copy. They look around, see what's already been done, and then mimic it with slight adjustments. That's why so many businesses look the same, so many ideas feel recycled, and so many lives feel predictable. But the truth is, copying locks you into the same boundaries as everyone else. It's like building your house on someone else's blueprint. You might change the paint or rearrange the furniture, but the walls remain the same. The habit of thinking only in terms of what has already been done is one of the most powerful traps that keeps people from breaking out of mediocrity. If you want to create something extraordinary, you can't simply look backward and rely on comparisons. You have to start from scratch, not from analogy. Think about how most people approach life decisions. They ask questions like, what job is safe? What business usually works? What path did my neighbor or relative take? But all of these questions are built on someone else's reality, not your own. The result is predictable. You end up confined by limits that were never yours in the first place. The reason this happens is simple: you people crave certainty. Copying what exists feels safer than inventing something new. But safety has a cost. It keeps you tethered to the same patterns, the same ceilings, the same average results. The real breakthrough comes when you stop asking, what has worked before? And instead ask, what are the basic truths of this problem, stripped of tradition, opinion, or assumption? That question forces the brain to work harder. It's uncomfortable, yes, but it's also liberating. Because once you break things down to the fundamentals, you realize how much unnecessary complexity people add. You realize how often cost, difficulty, and impossibility are just illusions built by poor thinking habits. Take a simple example. Most people, when faced with a product that seems too expensive, immediately assume it must cost a lot because that's just the market price. They never stop to wonder, what is this product really made of? What are the materials? How much do those materials actually cost? Could the process be simplified? Could I design it differently? Those questions lead to new possibilities. But if all you do is compare one product to another, you'll never innovate. You'll just choose between existing options. And choosing between existing options is not how revolutions happen. This doesn't just apply to business or technology, it applies to life itself. People look at their circumstances, where they were born, what education they had, how much money they inherited, and they compare themselves to others. They say, people like me don't get that far, or people in my situation can't achieve that. But those are assumptions, not truths. The fundamentals are different. Every person has a brain capable of learning, adapting, and reimagining. Every person has 24 hours in a day. Every person has the ability to ask questions that others avoid. Those are the raw materials. If you focus on those instead of copying the outcomes of others, you start building a different future. Most people resist this way of thinking because it demands responsibility. When you copy, you can always say, well, I did what others did, and it didn't work, so it's not my fault. But when you think from first principles, when you strip things down to the truth and build upward, the results rest entirely on your choices. That level of ownership is scary, but it's also empowering, because it means your future isn't limited by what others have done. It's limited only by the questions you're willing to ask and the effort you're willing to apply. Let's look at another dimension: innovation. True innovation isn't about making something slightly better. It's about redefining the foundation. Imagine if the Wright brothers had only asked, how can we make a better horse carriage? They never would have built an airplane. Innovation happens when someone refuses to accept the default frame of reference. They don't ask how to improve the existing option. They ask whether the entire question needs to be rewritten. That is the essence of powerful thinking, and it's the complete opposite of the poor habit of thinking only in analogies. Now, why do so few people use this approach if it's so effective? Because it's difficult. It's mentally exhausting to tear apart assumptions and rebuild from scratch. The brain is wired to conserve energy, and following precedent feels easier. But easy doesn't create change. Easy doesn't create wealth. Easy doesn't rewrite the rules. If you want to stand out, you have to be willing to do the mental work that others avoid. You have to ask the uncomfortable, fundamental questions. Even when people laugh, even when they doubt, even when the answer isn't clear right away. The beauty of this way of thinking is that it compounds. The more you train yourself to see problems at the fundamental level, the faster your brain becomes at spotting opportunities others overlook. It's like training a muscle. At first it feels awkward, but over time it becomes your default. And when that shift happens, you no longer see the world the way most people do. Where others see limits, you see raw ingredients. Where others see barriers, you see puzzles waiting to be solved. Where others stop, you begin. This habit doesn't just change businesses or technologies. It changes lives. Imagine approaching your career, your finances, your relationships, even your health, with the mindset of stripping away assumptions and rebuilding from fundamentals. You stop asking, what do people usually do? And start asking, what truly works? What's the most efficient, logical, effective way? Suddenly, you're not confined by tradition. You're not boxed in by averages. You're creating your own path, one decision at a time. And that is where real progress comes from. Not from copying, not from small adjustments, but from bold thinking rooted in truth. Most people will never get there, because their minds are trapped in the comfort of analogy. But those who are willing to step outside, who are willing to challenge assumptions and see problems with fresh eyes, they are the ones who move the world forward. And it all begins with refusing to let poor thinking habits dictate the boundaries of what's possible. Failure. The word alone makes most people shrink. It carries a weight, a sting, a sense of finality that scares people into inaction. But what if failure wasn't the enemy? What if it was the most reliable teacher you'll ever have? The problem is that society trains people to see failure as a verdict. You fail a test, you're labeled as not smart. You fail at a business, people whisper that you weren't cut out for it. You fail at a relationship, and suddenly the story becomes that you're not worthy of love. This conditioning is everywhere, and it creates one of the most destructive habits, the belief that failure is fatal. And that belief alone is enough to keep most people from ever reaching beyond the average. The truth is simple: failure is data. It is feedback. It is the universe handing you a report card saying, "This method didn't work. Try another." That's it. Nothing more. Nothing less. But because so many people misinterpret it as proof of personal inadequacy, they avoid it at all costs. They choose comfort over growth, routine over risk, mediocrity over mastery. The irony is, by avoiding failure, they end up failing anyway, just quietly, slowly, and without ever discovering what they were truly capable of. Think about a child learning to walk. They stumble, fall, crash into furniture, scrape their knees. Yet nobody tells them, "You failed, so walking isn't for you." Everyone understands the falls are part of the process. But somewhere along the way, adults forget this truth. They learn to fear the stumble. They learn to equate mistakes with shame. And once that happens, their growth slows to a crawl. Instead of running toward new possibilities, they tiptoe, terrified of tripping. The people who achieve extraordinary things are not immune to failure. In fact, they fail more often than anyone else. But here's the difference: they don't view it as a scar, they view it as fuel. Every explosion, every mistake, every rejection becomes data that sharpens their approach. They collect failures like an engineer collects test results, not like a critic collecting insults. And over time, those failures become the foundation of their breakthroughs. Let's break this down in practical terms. Imagine you're building a new product. You test version 1 and it doesn't work. Most people stop there. They take the failure personally and decide the idea was a bad one. But those who truly understand growth see the failed test as valuable information. It's not proof that the product is impossible. It's proof that version 1 wasn't the right solution. So you build version 2. Maybe that fails as well, but now you've eliminated 2 wrong paths. You're closer to the right one. By the time you reach version 10, you've built something that not only works, but works better than if you had been afraid to test at all. This mindset doesn't just apply to inventions. It applies to life. When you apply for a job and don't get it, that's data. Perhaps your skills need sharpening, or perhaps that company wasn't the right fit. When you try to save money and fail, that's data. Maybe your strategy was flawed. Maybe your spending habits need redesigning. When you pursue a goal and stumble, that's not the end. It's information pointing you toward a better approach. If you train your brain to see it that way, failure transforms from something to fear into something to pursue. But here's the challenge: embracing failure requires humility. Most people can't stand the idea of being wrong. They want to protect their ego more than they want to improve. So they stick to what's safe. They play small games they know they can win, rather than risking losses in games that could transform their future. This is why you see so many people living predictable lives. Not because they lack ability, but because they're addicted to avoiding the possibility of being wrong. Now, consider this: failure doesn't just give you information. It builds resilience. Every time you stumble and get back up, you train your mind and body to endure. Resilience is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. People who hide from failure never build that muscle, so when life inevitably challenges them, they collapse. But those who practice failure, who fail often and keep moving, become unbreakable. They develop a toughness that can't be faked, because it's forged in the fire of experience. Look at any great achievement in history, and behind it, you'll find a trail of failures. The light bulb wasn't invented on the first try. Airplanes didn't fly smoothly in their first designs. Even the simplest breakthroughs, like discovering new medicines or designing new tools, came from endless rounds of failure, testing, and refinement. Each setback was not a dead end, but a stepping stone. That's the lesson most people miss. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It is part of success. You cannot have one without the other. But here's the most empowering part. Once you stop fearing failure, you become unstoppable. Because suddenly, risk doesn't paralyze you. Doubt doesn't derail you. Criticism doesn't define you. You're free to try, to test, to push boundaries. While everyone else is frozen, waiting for the perfect plan, you're out there collecting data, iterating, improving. And in the long run, progress belongs to the person who takes more swings at the ball, not the one who stands there planning forever. So the question is not, will I fail? The question is, how fast can I learn from it, adapt, and try again? If you can answer that with action, you've already placed yourself in a different category than most people. Because most will spend their lives avoiding the sting of failure, while a few will embrace the sting, learn from it, and use it to create something extraordinary. And those few will always end up shaping the future the many end up living in. Most people sabotage their future because they're addicted to the short term. They want quick results, instant rewards, immediate comfort. The idea of waiting, of investing effort today for something that might not pay off for years, feels unbearable. This short-term mindset is one of the most destructive thinking habits, and it explains why so many people remain stuck where they are. They choose the immediate over the meaningful. They trade what they want most for what they want now. Think about how this shows up in daily life. Someone gets a paycheck, and instead of saving or investing, they spend it on something flashy to look successful in the moment. Someone sets a goal to build a business, but gives up after a few months because they haven't seen massive returns yet. Someone starts a fitness journey, but after a couple of weeks of hard work, they quit because the results aren't obvious. These aren't failures of ability. They're failures of perspective. People are so focused on short-term gratification that they never give themselves the chance to experience long-term transformation. The truth is, everything worthwhile takes time. Building wealth, building mastery, building impact. It all requires patience, persistence, and the ability to see beyond the immediate. But most people don't cultivate that ability. They live in a cycle of starting and quitting, chasing and abandoning, always hungry for the next quick hit of progress. They want the fruit without planting the seed, watering the soil, and waiting for the tree to grow. And because of that, they never taste the harvest. Short-term thinking creates another dangerous illusion, the belief that if something doesn't work right away, it must not work at all. This is why so many people jump from one opportunity to another, one job to another, one idea to another. They're looking for the magic formula that will deliver instant success. But here's the reality: there is no magic formula. There is only time, effort, and compounding. You plant, you water, you wait, you nurture. That process is not glamorous, but it's the only way anything great is built. One of the reasons people fall into short-term thinking is because they measure themselves against others. They see someone else who's already successful and feel impatient. They compare their year 1 to someone else's year 20 and get discouraged. But that's a trap. Every journey has its own timeline. Comparing yourself to someone further ahead only tricks you into believing you're behind, when in reality, you're just in the early stages of your own compounding curve. Compounding is a force that rewards the long-term thinker. Small consistent actions, repeated over time, create results that look impossible in the beginning. Saving a small amount every month doesn't feel like much until years later, when it has multiplied. Reading and learning for an hour a day doesn't feel transformative until suddenly you've built a mind sharper than most. Showing up and putting in the work every day might look ordinary, but over time, it builds an extraordinary life. The tragedy is that most people quit before compounding can work for them. They stop watering the plant just before it breaks the soil. There's also a psychological reason. Short-term thinking keeps people poor. The brain loves certainty. Immediate rewards feel safe and satisfying, while long-term goals feel uncertain. Spending money now guarantees pleasure, while saving for the future only promises a possibility. Quitting a challenge removes the discomfort today, while pushing through might or might not deliver results tomorrow. So the brain chooses the short term to avoid uncertainty. But here's the paradox: certainty in the short term creates uncertainty in the long term. You may feel good now, but you pay the price later, with debt, regret, and wasted potential. Long-term thinking flips that equation. It accepts short-term discomfort in exchange for long-term certainty. It accepts sacrifice today to secure freedom tomorrow. It's not easy, but it's powerful. Because when you train yourself to think in decades instead of days, your choices begin to align with your true vision, not your temporary emotions. You stop chasing what looks good now and start building what will endure. Ask yourself, what matters more? A comfortable weekend or a life of freedom? A shiny purchase today or the wealth to never worry again? An easy shortcut or the mastery that makes you irreplaceable? The answers are obvious, but most people don't act on them because the lure of the short term is too strong. That's the habit that must be broken. Breaking it starts with awareness. Catch yourself when you're making a choice based on immediate gratification. Ask, am I making this decision for today or for the next 10 years? That single question can shift your entire perspective. Over time, this becomes a habit, a new way of thinking where your horizon expands. Suddenly, every decision is measured not by how it feels now, but by what it creates later. And here's the secret: once you embrace long-term thinking, your patience becomes your competitive edge. While everyone else is quitting after a few setbacks, you're still building. While everyone else is distracted by the next shiny opportunity, you're compounding. While everyone else is comfortable now but struggling later, you're enduring now and free later. That patience, that persistence, eventually sets you apart so far that people call you lucky. But it wasn't luck. It was the discipline to think beyond the short term. In the end, short-term thinking is poverty thinking. It keeps people chasing crumbs, while long-term thinking builds empires. If you want to escape mediocrity, stop asking what will pay off this week, this month, or even this year. Start asking what will pay off for the rest of your life. Because the decisions that look small now, the habit you build, the skill you practice, the dollar you invest, are the very decisions that, over time, create the kind of freedom and wealth that short-term thinkers will never experience. Excuses are the most expensive currency in the world because they cost people the life they could have had. Every time someone says, I can't because of the economy, or I can't because of where I come from, or I can't because of my boss, my parents, my government, what they are really saying is, I refuse to take responsibility for my future. And that refusal is exactly what keeps them trapped. Excuses feel comforting in the moment. They give you a reason not to act, not to risk, not to fail. But in the long run, they are poison. They preserve your comfort, but they also preserve your limitations. The mind is brilliant at rationalizing. If you want to justify an action, you'll find an endless list of reasons. It's not the right time. I don't have the resources. People like me don't succeed at that. The list never ends. And the irony is, the smarter someone is, the better their excuses become. They construct elaborate arguments that sound logical, but at the core, they're nothing more than fear dressed up as reason. Fear of failing. Fear of looking foolish. Fear of stepping into the unknown. The excuse is just the mask fear wears. The danger of excuses is that they feel true. If you say, "I can't start a business because I don't have capital," that feels like reality. But it's not reality, it's a perspective. The truth is, businesses are started every day with little or no capital. If you say, "I can't get fit because I don't have time," that feels like reality. But it's not reality, it's a choice. You have the same 24 hours as everyone else. The difference is how you prioritize. Excuses blur that line and convince you that choices are fates, when in fact they're not. This is why excuses are so dangerous. They rob you of your agency. They shift control of your life from your hands to the external world. Suddenly, your success isn't about what you do, it's about what someone else allows you to do. And once you believe that you've surrendered, you've signed away your power before the game even begins. That's how people end up stuck for years, even decades, blaming circumstances while others with the same circumstances push ahead. Now imagine a life without excuses. Imagine saying, "Yes, the economy is tough, but I'll find a way. Yes, I wasn't born into wealth, but I'll create it. Yes, I've failed before, but that failure is fuel." That mindset flips everything. Suddenly, you're in control. Suddenly, the narrative isn't about what the world is doing to you, but about what you are doing in the world. And that shift, from victim to creator, is the single most important transformation anyone can make. It's worth noticing that excuses also serve another purpose. They protect ego. When you make an excuse, you don't have to admit you didn't try hard enough, or that your strategy was wrong, or that you gave up too soon. The excuse lets you believe that it wasn't your fault. But here's the truth: if it's never your fault, it will never be your victory. You cannot outsource responsibility and still claim success. The same wall that protects your ego also blocks your growth. There's a reason people who refuse excuses rise so quickly. They don't waste energy rationalizing. They spend that energy finding solutions. If they don't have money, they figure out how to provide value first. If they don't have time, they cut out distractions. If they don't have knowledge, they learn. Every obstacle becomes a challenge to solve rather than a reason to stop. Over time, this mindset compounds into unstoppable momentum. Meanwhile, those stuck in excuses stay exactly where they are, waiting for circumstances to change, never realizing the circumstance that most needs to change is their own thinking. It's also important to see that excuses are contagious. Surround yourself with people who constantly justify their inaction, and you'll start doing the same. You'll normalize mediocrity. You'll convince yourself that settling is acceptable because everyone else is doing it. But the opposite is also true. Surround yourself with people who reject excuses, and suddenly your standards rise. You stop tolerating your own limitations. You start catching yourself when you slip into that language of defeat. The people around you will either feed your excuses or destroy them. Choose wisely. What makes excuses so deceptive is that they often come with partial truths. Yes, maybe the economy is tough. Yes, maybe you don't have the same opportunities someone else had. Yes, maybe you faced real disadvantages. But here's the critical difference: excuses stop at the problem, while responsibility moves past it to the solution. Responsibility doesn't deny reality, it works with it. It says, "This is hard, but it's not impossible. This is unfair, but it's not final. This is my starting point, not my ending point." If you want to measure the distance between where you are and where you could be, look at the gap created by excuses. Every excuse is a brick in a wall separating you from your potential. Remove the excuses, and the wall comes down. Suddenly, possibilities open. You realize that the obstacle wasn't really money, time, or opportunity. The obstacle was the story you kept telling yourself about why you couldn't. So the question is this: are you going to keep building that wall, brick by brick, with every excuse you tell yourself? Or are you going to tear it down and step into the freedom that comes from taking full responsibility? One path feels easier today, but guarantees struggle tomorrow. The other path feels harder today, but creates freedom tomorrow. The choice is always yours, and it always starts in the mind. Knowledge is the fuel of progress. Yet most people stop filling their tank far too early. Somewhere between finishing school and entering the workforce, they decide their education is complete. They close the book, stop asking questions, and settle into the belief that whatever they know now will be enough to carry them through life. This is one of the most damaging thinking habits a person can adopt: the habit of avoiding knowledge. Because in a world that changes by the minute, refusing to keep learning is the fastest way to guarantee that you'll be left behind. Look around and you'll see it everywhere. People relying on what they learned 10, 20, 30 years ago, even as the world has completely transformed. Industries evolve, technologies advance, new opportunities appear daily, but their thinking remains frozen in time. They cling to old ways because learning feels uncomfortable, because change feels threatening, because it's easier to stay inside the familiar. But comfort is expensive. Comfort costs growth, and eventually, it costs freedom. The truth is, the mind was not designed to retire at 22. The brain thrives on challenge, on curiosity, on expansion. It was built to absorb, adapt, and innovate. When you stop feeding it, you weaken it. When you avoid knowledge, you don't just stay the same, you regress. Because the rest of the world keeps moving, and what once felt current becomes outdated. Skills lose value. Perspectives become irrelevant. The opportunities that once stood open slowly close, not because they disappeared, but because you refused to keep up with them. One of the greatest illusions people live under is the idea that education ends with a diploma. That piece of paper is not a finish line, it's the starting line. It certifies that you're capable of learning, not that you've learned everything you'll ever need. Yet most people treat it as the end. They leave classrooms and never return to books. They leave universities and never seek mentors. They leave formal education and never build informal education into their lives. It's like buying a state of the art rocket and then refusing to fuel it. You're grounded not because you lack power, but because you stopped feeding it the energy it needs to launch. Avoiding knowledge also creates dependency. If you don't know how to solve problems yourself, you'll always rely on someone else who does. If you don't invest in your own understanding, you'll always pay the price of ignorance. That dependency is one of the reasons so many people remain poor. Not just financially, but in every sense. They depend on others to tell them what to think, what to buy, what to believe. They follow the herd because they don't trust their own ability to learn, question, and decide. And when you follow blindly, you end up exactly where the herd goes. Usually into mediocrity. Contrast that with the person who commits to lifelong learning. They don't see knowledge as a requirement, but as an advantage. They devour books, listen to podcasts, take courses, study industries outside their own. They ask questions relentlessly, not because they doubt themselves, but because they want to expand themselves. And over time, this habit compounds. Each new idea connects to others, creating a network of understanding that allows them to see opportunities invisible to the average mind. While others are locked into outdated beliefs, they're designing the future. There's a direct connection between learning and earning, but not in the simplistic sense of a degree guaranteeing income. The connection is deeper. Every piece of knowledge expands your toolkit. Every new skill increases your leverage. Every insight you gain sharpens your decision-making. And when you stack those advantages year after year, you become impossible to ignore. You create value in any environment, because no matter what changes, your ability to adapt remains intact. That adaptability is what separates those who thrive from those who struggle. It's important to recognize that avoiding knowledge isn't always laziness. Sometimes it's pride. People think they already know enough, so they stop listening. They dismiss new ideas, defend their outdated methods, and cling to what worked in the past. But arrogance is just another mask for fear. Fear of admitting you don't know. Fear of looking ignorant. Fear of starting again at the bottom of a new learning curve. The irony is, by trying to appear knowledgeable, they ensure their knowledge becomes obsolete. The opposite of this is humility. The most powerful minds remain students forever. They're not threatened by what they don't know. They're energized by it. They treat every conversation, every failure, every challenge as a chance to learn something new. They don't need to be the smartest in the room. They need to keep getting smarter every day. That humility to keep learning is what eventually makes them leaders in their fields. Knowledge isn't just about acquiring information. It's about transformation. The purpose of learning is to change how you see, how you think, how you act. A book unread is just paper. A course ignored is just wasted potential. Knowledge only matters when you apply it, when you let it reshape your perspective and influence your choices. That's why avoiding knowledge is so costly. It doesn't just mean you miss out on information, it means you miss out on transformation. So the question is simple, are you feeding your mind or starving it? Every day you choose. Every day you either strengthen your capacity to adapt and succeed, or you weaken it by staying stagnant. Avoiding knowledge may feel easier in the moment, but it ensures hardship in the future. Seeking knowledge may feel harder now, but it guarantees freedom later. The choice is always available. The only difference between those who build extraordinary lives and those who remain stuck is which choice they make more often. Most people live their lives in cages built from the opinions of others. From the time we're children, we're taught to measure our worth by approval. Parents, teachers, friends, society at large. That habit becomes so ingrained that by the time we're adults, we can hardly make a move without wondering what people will think. And that single habit, overvaluing opinions, quietly kills more potential than almost anything else. Because when you live in the shadow of approval, you never step fully into your own light. Think about how many dreams are abandoned, not because they were impossible, but because someone laughed. A business idea tossed aside because a family member called it unrealistic. A creative vision shut down because peers rolled their eyes. A bold career move avoided because, what will people say? The tragedy isn't that others doubted. It's that their doubt was allowed to take root. When you hand the steering wheel of your life to the opinions of others, don't be surprised when you never reach your own destination. Opinions are cheap. Everyone has them. They're shaped by limited perspectives, biases, fears, and personal experiences. Yet people treat them as if they're laws of physics. They forget that an opinion isn't reality. It's just someone's snapshot of reality. When you let that dictate your path, you reduce your life to the size of someone else's imagination. And most imaginations are small. Most people can only see what's in front of them. They can't see beyond their own limitations. So when they tell you something can't be done, what they're really saying is, I can't see myself doing it. But their vision has nothing to do with your capacity. The most dangerous part is that opinions can feel like truth when repeated enough. If you hear 10 people say you'll fail, it begins to sound like certainty. If you hear constant warnings about risk, it begins to sound like wisdom. But repetition doesn't make something true. It just makes it familiar. And familiarity is powerful. It's easier to accept the consensus than to break from it. That's why so many settle for ordinary lives. They confuse the common opinion with reality. But here's what separates those who achieve the extraordinary. They refuse to outsource their judgment. They listen, but they don't obey. They weigh opinions against evidence, logic, and vision. They ask, what's true? And what's just noise? They recognize that every great achievement in history looked impossible to the majority, until it was done. If you measure possibility by consensus, you will never do anything groundbreaking. Another hidden trap is that opinions often come from people who love us. Parents want us safe. Friends want us comfortable. Colleagues want us predictable. Their advice usually comes from care, but care rooted in fear. They fear your failure, fear your discomfort, fear the risk of the unknown. But a life guided by fear is a life half lived. If you accept their fear as your own, you inherit their limitations. And, while they may sleep soundly knowing you didn't take the leap, you'll lie awake wondering what could have been. It's worth noting that opinions can also be intoxicating when they're positive. Praise can be as dangerous as criticism. If you build your life on applause, you become just as enslaved as if you build it on doubt. Both mean your direction depends on others. One keeps you from starting, the other traps you into pleasing. Either way, you're not truly free. The goal isn't to ignore all feedback, but to anchor yourself so deeply in your vision, your principles, and your evidence-based thinking that no opinion, good or bad, can sway your trajectory. This doesn't mean living in arrogance. It means living in clarity. It means listening to perspectives without letting them replace your own reasoning. It means being open to learning without being controlled by approval. It means seeking truth, not consensus. The person who masters this balance becomes unstoppable because they draw from the collective wisdom of others without being trapped by the collective fear. Imagine how many ideas are waiting to be born, but are silenced by ridicule. Imagine how many breakthroughs are delayed because someone was afraid of looking foolish. Now imagine what happens when you remove that weight. When you stop asking, what will they think? And start asking, what is possible? Entire worlds open up. Risks that seemed unbearable become just challenges. Dreams that felt distant become inevitable. The truth is, people are going to talk no matter what. Do nothing, and they'll judge you. Do something, and they'll still judge you. The difference is that when you pursue your own vision, at least the judgment happens on your terms. At least you're living a life that belongs to you, not a life scripted by the expectations of others. And over time, those same people who doubted will call you brave. Those who mocked will call you brilliant. But by then, their opinions won't matter, because you'll already know that it was never about them. It was always about whether you had the courage to think for yourself. So the real question is, whose voice is guiding your choices? The faint echo of other people's fears, or the stronger voice of your own reason and vision? One path leads to safety, approval, and mediocrity. The other leads to risk, resistance, and ultimately, greatness. Every day, you decide which voice wins. And every day, that decision shapes the life you're building. There is a silent assumption that holds most people back. The belief that ordinary effort should somehow deliver extraordinary results. It's an illusion that spreads because it's comforting. People want to believe that if they just show up, do the bare minimum, and wait long enough, something remarkable will happen. But reality doesn't work like that. Average effort guarantees average outcomes, and in most cases, it guarantees stagnation. If you want to live a life beyond the ordinary, the level of effort you bring has to go beyond the ordinary too. Look at how the majority approach their goals. They clock in, they clock out. They do exactly what's expected and not an ounce more. They treat discipline as optional, hard work as negotiable, and consistency as something reserved for when they feel motivated. Then they wonder why they stay stuck in the same place year after year. The truth is simple. Mediocrity is the natural result of doing what's comfortable. Growth requires pushing beyond that comfort, stretching yourself further than feels reasonable, and putting in the kind of work most people aren't willing to. Effort is the great equalizer. You can't control where you were born, the family you had, or the opportunities you started with, but you can control how much energy you put into changing your circumstances. Talent, intelligence, and connections can give someone a head start, but sustained effort will outpace all of them over time. The person who relentlessly refines their skills, who works when others rest, who keeps going when others quit, this is the person who eventually creates results that seem impossible to the casual observer. The problem is that most people underestimate how much effort is really required. They set goals and assume progress will be linear. Put in a bit of work, see a bit of progress. But real progress doesn't follow that pattern. At first, it feels like you're pouring energy into a black hole. You work late, sacrifice comfort, endure setbacks, and for a long time, nothing seems to move. That's where most people give up. They think the lack of visible results means the effort isn't working. But in reality, all that effort is building unseen foundations. Momentum accumulates slowly, then suddenly. The ones who endure long enough to hit that tipping point are the ones who reap the rewards. There's also the myth of balance that discourages extraordinary effort. People say you should avoid working too hard, that you should always aim for comfort, that obsession is unhealthy. But the truth is, anything extraordinary requires periods of obsession. Balance can come later, once the foundation is built. Until then, imbalance is the price of progress. Those who insist on keeping everything easy and comfortable rarely create anything worth remembering. Effort requires sacrifice, and sacrifice always feels unfair until you realize what it built for you. It's not just about working harder. It's about working with intensity and focus. Many confuse being busy with being effective. They scatter their energy across 100 small tasks, never giving their full force to the things that actually matter. Extraordinary effort means directing your energy like a laser, cutting through distractions, and pouring yourself into the highest impact work. That kind of effort doesn't just produce results faster. It multiplies results beyond what average people think is possible. Another trap is entitlement. People think they deserve outcomes simply because they want them. They imagine success as a lottery where desire is the ticket. But wanting isn't enough. Wishing, visualizing, even planning aren't enough. The world doesn't reward what you want. It rewards what you do. Effort is the bridge between desire and reality. Without it, dreams remain fantasies. With it, even improbable visions can become inevitable. Effort also builds character in ways comfort never will. When you push through exhaustion, when you discipline yourself to keep going, you're not just moving toward your goals. You're transforming who you are. You become resilient, adaptable, capable of enduring storms that would break most people. And that transformation is permanent. Once you've proven to yourself that you can do more than you thought, that you can outlast the struggle, no one can take that from you. That confidence becomes the fuel for even greater challenges. It's important to recognize that effort is not glamorous. It's not the highlight reel that others see. It's the quiet, unseen hours when no one is watching. It's saying no to distractions, resisting comfort, grinding through monotony. People romanticize success, but they rarely see the relentless effort behind it. And because they don't see it, they assume it doesn't exist. They look at outcomes and call them luck, timing, or talent. But behind every so-called lucky break, there's usually years of invisible effort. So the question becomes, are you willing to do the work that no one applauds, that no one notices, that doesn't pay off immediately? Because that's what separates those who stay average from those who rise. If you only work when it feels good, if you only give effort when the rewards are obvious, you'll never reach the levels reserved for those who keep going regardless. Effort must become a way of life, not a temporary sprint. In the end, effort is the clearest reflection of your priorities. People say they want change, they want success, they want freedom. But their effort tells the truth. If you're not willing to put in the energy, then the desire is just a wish. But if you align your effort with your vision, if you consistently pour yourself into the work that matters, you can bend reality. Extraordinary effort doesn't guarantee immediate success, but it guarantees transformation. And transformation, sustained over time, makes success inevitable.